Will we begin in a few minutes? We are starting in about 5 minutes. Hello everybody, and a big welcome to you all for our sixth, or you might want to say maybe sixth and a half webinar from eSkills on language acquisition. My name is Jens Van Vliet, and I work for eSkills.net. In fact, I'm very involved with eSkills.net from perhaps mostly a pedagogical point of view and a support point of view. We're a company that's based in Paris, France, and we have been working with different organizations and putting platforms together so that we can help people learn languages through the new phenomena of e-learning, which is something that is new. I wanted to just have a chance to talk a little bit about me. everybody, and a big welcome to you all for our sixth, or you might want to say maybe sixth and a half webinar from eSkills on language acquisition. My name is Jens Van Vliet, and I work for eSkills.net. In fact, I'm very involved with eSkills.net from perhaps mostly a pedagogical point of view and a support point of view. We're a company that's based in Paris, France, and we have been working with different organizations and putting platforms together so that we can help people learn languages through the new phenomena of e-learning, which is something that is new. I wanted to just have a chance to talk a little bit about me, just so that you get an idea of where I'm coming from and how I came to really conceive of this whole platform idea and what is involved and how it can be used for strategies for language acquisition. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about also then some experiences that I've had and some references that I've used to build techniques to help yourself and to help your students, because I think I'm talking majority today with people that are working in organizations, great companies such as ACE Training and other ones. Where I think we're talking also to Masterpiece. I think they're near Bogota, Colombia, and other organizations that do fantastic training, and so that I can share and we can talk about some of the aspects of language acquisition. And I will be popping in and out as far as my image is concerned, because I want to just have a chance to show you some references as I am going along. In the meantime, you will be able to talk to me, so you can chat, and I have other assistants over here helping us out on chatting, and so I will be able to answer your questions, and we will be able to answer your questions. So I'll try not to be too speedy, and so I'm just going to begin, and here we go. So the first things that I wanted to talk about are, so actually, so my background is I am from, my parents are from Holland, and I grew up in Montreal, which is already a fairly diverse linguistic environment. So basically from a maternal language of Dutch and then moving into the English community in Montreal, and then having spent a bit of time going to French schools later on, put me into a fairly rich environment where one had to learn how to survive, kind of in a way, but working and communicating in different circumstances. So one thing that was interesting about all of it was that I had an opportunity to learn Dutch through acquisition, through English through youth, and then French later on through the opportunity to work in French schools. So, and this will all connect somewhere or other, and I will show you how this will fit together. Eventually, we did move to Toronto, and I had an opportunity to go study at the University of Toronto, which is a ridiculously large campus of 78,000 students in this city of Toronto, right downtown. So that was basically the initial linguistic experiences, Toronto being much more of an English nature. But it becomes quite interesting because following my studies, I had an opportunity to work in the French community in Toronto, where I had a chance to work in a school called Ecole Etienne Brûlé, actually a secondary school, Ecole Secondaire Etienne Brûlé, which was part of the Francophone community in Toronto. So there was an incredibly diverse linguistic environment where I had an opportunity to be working in English, teaching English for the mostly French national community, the French communities in the city of Toronto. By the way, I really don't want to bore you with too many of the details of this, but it actually all does kind of connect and fit together. So I can, it'll give you a bit of an idea of what the connection is, and I'll let you know. So Etienne Brûlé is a really diverse environment, but it works mostly for the French community in Toronto, which is a predominantly English environment. So the idea of communicating language training, especially English at that time, was not such a big challenge because the environment was mostly in English. So following that, I had an opportunity to move out to Paris, France, and I wanted to change environments, but to work in multilingual and in language training environments. So I did the classic move and worked in company, but also further started to have a chance to work in the academic institutions in the country and for BTS and for some of the political science schools, which provided different kind of challenges for me. And coming from outside of Europe, I had the opportunity to realize something that most, certainly North Americans, do not know, that learning other languages, it's really important. In fact, it becomes an issue of survival, and that Europeans, they have to learn English, and it's a completely different situation from what one may encounter in other environments, North America, or well, particularly North America at this point. And it was at this point in time that I realized that there were people coming towards me that were needing help for literally their survival. And from that point on, which was really in the later 90s, I was trying to find out and develop different strategies for learning languages as quick as possible. So following this situation, I did have an opportunity to move back to Canada, and I had a chance to work for an organization called King George International College, running the programs and setting them up. And the objective was to meet the needs of mostly Southeast Asian students that were once again in a situation of crucial necessity, where they were having to be able to function in English, and it was very much dependent on their criteria for a lot of school entries and for job possibilities. Similar to Europe, with some differences. And being back in Canada, this is where I had an opportunity to see, considering the size of the country and the history and the size of the country, I had an opportunity to be introduced for the first time, and this is in the late 90s, to different forms of e-learning. And the e-learning market there was a necessity because in Canada, you have to be able to function from a distance. And I did have some experience in distance learning in Toronto, working with northern communities in Canada, doing what they were calling distance learning, but with different tools. This was the first time being in Vancouver where I saw really good formats of e-learning. Now, this is all for a reason why I'm telling you this, because it'll all fit together. So the objective here is to find out, and what I was learning and figuring out was how to find out to really make people learn quickly, because it's no longer just in most cases in which I was functioning were mostly for people that were having to learn a language quite literally out of necessity, and it would be a career issue. So it's survival. Part of it was survival. So trying to put some tools together to make this happen as quick as possible. And I'm going to now start to talk a little bit about what kind of tools they are. And having been in Vancouver, this is where I had an opportunity to find out about a really, really great book called Outliers, written by a Canadian author also from the University of Toronto, who works at the New Yorker magazine, and he wrote a book, Malcolm Gladwell, called Outliers. Outliers is particularly interesting because it talks about the concept of learning and how people learn as quick as possible, and it started to make me think a little bit about some of the strategies in learning and what's possible, and how we can put together this, what he coined as the 10,000 hour phrase, where one is required to spend 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. I highly recommend this book. If you ever have a chance to read it, it's something that can be a fantastic read. One of the issues that he brings up is that in the beginning, where he talks about environment, and then he talks about issues and opportunity, where he talks about Vancouver, one story, it's a sequence of articles that he did write for the New Yorker magazine, where he talks about Vancouver hockey players, and that he and a friend of his were at the Canadian Junior Championship. This is Canadian hockey stuff. And what they found was that all of the hockey players that were the best on the teams were born between January, February, and March. And it became kind of a quandary and a query and a question and a center of interest. So Malcolm Gladwell went back to New York, and he decided, now he's not an expert in these areas, but he had access to people to try and find out what actually this was all about. And so they started to do research, and what they found out was that a lot of the people that were on the hockey teams were born between January 1st and the March 1st, meaning that they were basically, and they did a study, and what they found out was that the children that were kids at 16, 17, or younger even, if they were born on December 29th, or 31st, sorry, then what would happen is they'd have to wait a year, and 12 months later, they would have a significant size advantage, and hence would be more interesting for a lot of the people that were watching them and helping them grow along in their careers. So this became a phenomenon where Gladwell also found out that it was similar to European soccer and also for academic standards. So students that were waiting a year were able to perfection a little bit more, a good word, I hope, their skills and their techniques, their language techniques, their competency and cognitive techniques, so they would have somewhat of an advantage, and that would spin off and swirl into teachers being more favorable towards them. They would get better help. They would go into the more advanced classes, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what Malcolm Gladwell coined as the 10,000-hour rule. It's very interesting. So it was at this point in time that I decided that I was going to start to try to dig and to see if I can find out how it would be possible to apply some of the rules and maybe bypass some of the standards and bypass some of the constants in learning to see if it would actually be possible to learn a language faster than normal. And I had an opportunity to work with several different people, great pedagogical developers in Vancouver, to start to see how we can put this e-learning platform together. And so one of the things that I was able to uncover was the concept of what I coined, or I started to talk about, where there are the three aspects of learning, and it's what I call deep learning and superficial learning and mid-range learning. And all three of these aspects have to be addressed and have different ways of being addressed so that we can learn as quickly as possible and in a systematic way. So one of the first aspects that I started to work on was discovering and learning about was the superficial aspect of language learning, and I would bring it a little bit more similar to the aspect of working in music, because that's what a lot of the 10,000-hour rules work with. What we found out was that at some point in time, it becomes volume and work and time. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are, but it's conscientious time to create an expertise. So what I was finding was that in the learning process for learning languages, the learning process was very complex for people, and they would be working on more mid and more profound aspects of the language learning. But they were, at some point in time, they were not able to there was a fluency that was lacking, so they were not able to speak in a very superficial manner. So they would confuse simple things such as days of the week, or there would be a hesitancy that would be for them would be more complex, because they would not be able to. They would confuse words such as Tuesday and Thursday. So I figured out, how do we address this? And it's the same thing when working with music or with sports. And so we created what we call warm-ups. And I think most of you have seen the warm-ups. The warm-ups are really meant as a tool to work on a daily basis for a certain amount of time, so that there's a fluency, so that our users on the platform are able to at least function as far as the training program is concerned, that they don't have hesitation in their conversations, such as people might encounter when they might be able to conjugate future perfect, or they're able to work very well with the phrasal verbs, et cetera, but they're not able to there's a fluency and a hesitancy that goes on. So it's very similar to scales. So the warm-ups have been designed to function a little bit like a music method, and that it can be practiced again and again, but actually in its own form. It's never used exactly like that. Its own form. It's more functioning as an exercise book, such as scales. Now, scales in music are in their form. They're constantly being used, but they're never actually used as scales. But scales will give you the right hand position. And the concept behind the warm-ups, or in the French version, les entraînements, which we also have for the Spanish, Española, Aceta, we're going to be putting those into there, where there is the warm-ups are an aspect where it's hopefully possible to to develop a fluency, and that's one of the most important parts. So another aspect, or at least the next aspect, or will go in contrast, is what I call profound learning. Profound learning is where basically there is a necessity to be going over routines to cover the fundamentals and to be working and understanding how the overall structure of a program, of a language learning process works. In fact, one of the reasons, or one of the ways that we came up with this is, in fact, in the beginning that I was thinking about this, was that there was a great movie. It's called Catch Me If You Can, if you like Leonardo DiCaprio or not. But it's an interesting idea. The concept, at one point, he was required to learn other languages because he was having to become clever and somewhat malin, as they would say in French, to be able to trick the system. So what he did was he was learning other languages, and I noticed that, in fact, it's not much more complex than going over again, routines, and that he had a tape recorder and he was repeating the language again and again. So that aspect of what I call profound learning is what we see on the site, where people actually cover vocabulary. They will cover certain techniques on the site, such as the grammatical points, etc., etc. Okay, so we can take a bit of a look just very quickly. So the concept in here, as you're coming into the system, is here are the weekly warm-ups. You know what these are. We've divided them into different levels. So it's possible to cover every aspect. Listening segment that hopefully can be done again and again. There's the routine. So by the end of the week, they have covered that point. There's the text in case they do want to see it. And then there always is a grammar point that will follow them, right? So they can check to the more specific aspect of the technique. And then the other aspects are oriented towards listen and repeat. So the concepts in the lessons are with the grammar and key points and objectives. And then the concepts introduced here, then we work on specific things for repetition and the key vocabulary. And this is where we start to see really how it's necessary to start to develop fundamentals, but more in a profound fashion. The next aspect, or the third aspect, is the mid-range learning, which is uses different strategies for developing your language competencies. There's a great expression that was coined in the United States, and they call it University on Wheels. And the University on Wheels is basically the concept of when you're moving around and that you are able to work when you're in the car or when you're doing other things, or that there are certain aspects that are semi-cognitive and semi-repetitious. So mid-range learning is something such as where you have an opportunity to download some of the content from the site and to reuse it again when you're being mobile, or when you have different opportunities to spend a bit of time during the day to check in for more profound and in-depth aspects, and functional, listening to podcasts, listening to TED, et cetera, et cetera. And these tools and resources should be made available because everybody does have a little bit of a learning, different learning interest, that they want to cover different aspects of their learning with different topics, especially as we see here in France, but also internationally. So it's a different aspect and a different approach for how people want to do this kind of learning approach. So I hope I'm being helpful in terms of the concepts, and the way this was all put together was quite thought out, or more through experience, and not alone at all. It was a mixed input from many different people, and many years of conceptualized design in it. There are different kinds of tools. There are apps, Duolingo, which I've been reading about a lot, but it's that's very much what I call superficial learning, where you're doing repetition and competition, gamification of learning. It's different from more profound learning for the platforms, and there are measurable aspects of learning. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to have an opportunity, and I know there's some questions that are coming in. I see some questions coming in from Colombia and all that. And I want to have a chance to speak with you. So I'm going to start to just, I have to jump over to the other side, and I will be able to answer your questions. Here we go. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar. And if you do have any questions, we're always available. If you want to know more, you can contact me, or you can go to EnglishAZ, FrançaisAZ, EspanolAZ, or eskills.net. We're always available. I know that there are people from different countries. We're doing a lot of work right now in Colombia, we're starting to do some work in South Africa, in India, and we're in Vietnam, and of course Western Europe. We have many students, 16,000 students coming up soon on the platforms. We have lots of new and exciting stuff. As you can see, we have a new chat on the front. So if you have any questions, we have people to support you and hold you through and let you know if you, or get back to you if you have any questions. I think that's pretty much it. I will just stick around for a few more minutes to see if there are any more questions that come up onto the chat. Okay, I'll be right back. Yes, so what I've done is I've put my email address onto the bottom of the page, and you can access me. Please let me know if I can help. Jens Van Vliet here. That's it for this week, and we will be doing more webinars, and very soon we'll be doing regular television shows which are coming up. We're going to have a chance to talk to different people. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you. Bye-bye from Jens Van Vliet. eSkills.net, EnglishAZ, FrançaisAZ, and EspanolAZ. Talk to you very, very, very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.